I want to start by sort of putting this conversation in a context, because I think understanding how disruptive technologies have occurred in the past can give us quite a good grounding or a good starting point for thinking about what might be happening now and what might be about to happen as we move forward. And I think a good starting point is thinking about trains. The line I've got at the top is time going from left to right. And trains were one of the biggest disruptors to our lives that we've actually ever seen. And it's interesting that initially trains were an idea. What might it mean for a train to come in and be present in our communities, in our countries? And this was the space for entrepreneurs and governments to speculate on what might be necessary to bring this form of technology and to allow it to transform our lives. So there's a lot of imagination, a lot of speculation, a lot of thinking through the type of investment that would be needed to actually make this become a reality. The next phase of trains was as an industry, because the trains, the train lines had to be built, and that took a long time. But it also enabled towns to be completely rejuvenated, because the wages from the people building the train tracks had to go somewhere, and it flowed back into towns and established towns. And once those processes were really sort of brought into a sort of a common process, we also then got the full extent of the service. And in the context of railways, that meant we had to actually get a common rail gauge. So we had lots of different rail services. So a lot of trains couldn't work between different places and they were quite limited. But once we got that common rail size, we could have trains going across countries. We could have trains doing all sorts of things. And we had the same thing with phones. If you can imagine, before the sort of mid-2000s, making an international phone call could be quite tricky in terms of knowing the cost and the way the connections were made. But once we got the GMSM system, the global system for mobiles, that changed everything. And it also heralded in the advent of 2G, which became 3G and 4G, and we're now in the world of 5G. So having a common platform for these things is so important. The internet came along, and while it had been with us for a long time, it hadn't been commercialized. And when it was commercialized, of course, the idea of what could it be? What might the internet bring to our lives? So it was, in the first instance, it was quite a space for people to speculate, again, to think about the nature of investment and the laws that would be, occurring, and how industry might work with this. It then became an industry, web developers, marketers, a whole range of people that then got bought into doing things differently. How do we do marketing in an online world? How do we sell things in an online world? How do we do banking in an online world? And our world, in a very short space of time, has been transformed. And now we rely on the internet for a whole range of services. And you'll notice how I've shifted from the right to the left here, because the amount of time that was involved in this process was severely truncated. It happened almost overnight historically, if we look at it. And now we find ourselves with different forms of artificial intelligence and its application. And today we're specifically going to think about what it means for the student in the age of AI. And again, the same process is occurring, but it's happening in a different way. We've got the idea of AI. That's something that's been discussed and debated for a long, long time. But we've now got industries and the impact on industry occurring almost simultaneously with the current contemporary thinking and the services they provide. So it's very, very difficult. There's no lead time into this disruptive change. It's occurring right in front of us. Different models superseding the next model, and makes it really, really complicated to try and understand where we're actually heading. The alternative is to look at something that's been incredibly static. So this is the QWERTY keyboard. It was invented 150 years ago. And part of the motivation for building it was to stop the keys on the typewriters from hitting each other. And so this different configuration of the keys enabled typing to be less interrupted by having to repair the mechanical systems of the typewriters. Ultimately, that meant slowing typing down. So this keyboard configuration here actually slowed down the productivity of people doing typing. And of course, we no longer have mechanical keys, but we still have QWERTY. This is an inefficient way of configuring the processes of hands and fingers to type, but it's a dominant design. We can't get rid of it, because to get rid of this would mean we'd all have to unlearn typing and then relearn typing. But that could take months. And the global economy is no appetite for getting the entire world to unlearn something and then relearn something new. So we're sort of stuck with this one way of doing things. And you can get a bit of a sense. It took railways quite a while to get to one common thing, one common rail gauge. It took the internet via phone services quite a while to get to one common way. But think about the impact that the internet had on bookshops, news outlets, music, and education has been largely shielded by the impact of the internet in terms of information industries, simply because its accreditation and the ability of providers to be able to accredit things is determined by governments. It's not an open slather who can provide the best form of education. It's governments that are shielding universities and other education providers. And I think this is most probably the area which is, going to cause us the greatest concerns going forward, that we may get a really sort of open field here. Now, what about AI? I mean, wow. There's no dominant design. There's no one foreseeable impact that we're going to have. There are thousands and thousands of people who are attempting to get hold of AI and use it in specific ways. Half of these things here, 90% of these things here won't exist in 10 years' time. If you're going to look at history and what that tells us. Not everyone can win. Something will emerge and something will become the platform, the way of doing things. If you look, say, in healthcare as an example, there are very specific applications that are looking to do specific things that will improve our ability to deliver health services and to provide health related outcomes. In the top left, I've got this particular one here on imaging and diagnostics. Imagine you just graduated this year as a radiologist. Dead. No future. Because all we need now is a technician to take the scan, an AI system, and they already exist now, to analyze the scan, and another technician to explain the scan. It's like pacemakers. We don't need doctors to be involved in their ongoing maintenance. We just need technicians who can understand the technological interface that's providing us with the updates. So even through health, we're going to see massive, massive disruptions in the way that things occur, which could be great for consumers, but the actual roles of people are going to be very different. I wanted to show you a quick example of what I think is most probably the cutting edge, the best sort of stuff that's happening in education. This is the Khan Mingo. So if you know the Khan Academy, I'm sure it's debatable what's best out there at the moment, but I think these guys are doing unbelievable things. So jump into the chat function there. And I want you to just start telling me what it actually is that you think, if I can get myself here to work, what is it that students do? Tell me what you think students do. Just chuck it into the chat and let's get a few of your suggestions there. Not looking for right and wrong answers here, guys. Just what do you think? If you're a student, what do you think it is you're doing? And if you're an educator, what do you think that they're doing? Okay, so we got reading and analysing, using critical thinking. Yep. What else have we got? I got you guys in the middle of lunch. Yes, students learn. I like that one. Students learn. Could it be any more? Does it need to be any more complicated than that? That students learn. Yep, and they're gaining knowledge. So if we say that our students learn, we can go through our next question. What's learning? Does anyone want to have a crack at throwing in an explanation? Short, one sentence. Acquiring knowledge and skills, yes. Expanding knowledge, yep. Developing understanding and developing skills, yes, Tanya. And work with all of those. But we can break it down into something that's even more fundamental. Growing is a nice one. Thanks, guys. Applying things, yes. All of those things can be reconciled to something very, very specific. They're all bona fide answers. But at the end of the day, the answer to that question is learning is a change in the brain's architecture. That's the big challenge for us all to face here when we're thinking about what we are doing with AI. It's thinking about how is it going to influence, or positively or negatively, a change in the brain's architecture. So as a learner, if you don't know how the brain's architecture changes in order to support both learning and your ability to solve future problems and challenges, you're missing out on many developmental opportunities because the learning doesn't happen just by chance, right? And if you're an educator, if you don't know how the brain's architecture changes during the process of learning, your ability to teach and or know if your students have learned anything new is severely limited. And it's these limitations of the brain that we need to keep really front and center when we're thinking about how are we going to use AI, because it actually could make everything worse. It could make everything better, but it could make things worse. So now I'm going to really challenge you. We've got 34 here in the participating. So I'm looking for a good 20 quick fire, single word, couple of word explanations for what I'm going to show you now. All right. So I want you to just type in really quickly what you think you see on the page. Trust me, you don't have to worry about being correct. We normally get around 50 different answers. For a crowd like this, I would expect at least 25 to 30 different answers for this question. All right. So when you look at the image on the screen, what is it that you see? Give yourself a couple of seconds if you're unsure, and then just type it in. It doesn't really matter what you say it is, but I just would love you to be able to see the variance of what you're thinking. So we've got ice flow, black and white. Ice flow, I'm not sure I've ever had that one before, Susan. Must be a creative thinker. What else have we got out there? What do you see? Old map, yeah, we get that. Fabric, you'll get that a lot. Fossil globes, yeah. Chocolate crinkles, right. I'm not sure about turtle. We get a lot of turtles, as a lot of maps. Marble, elephant, yeah, elephants pop up. Cow, very good. Planets, skeletons, Elephant. Very good. All right. Let's move on now. What I want you to do, I'm going to show you something. I'm only going to show it to you for about 20 seconds, right? And I want you to do a count of a particular letter for me. And then I want you to write in the answer. All right. So how many F's are in this sentence here? F for Fred. How many F's? I'll give you a few seconds to look. Okay. So we're ranging from 3, 3, 3, 5, 6, 6, 3, 6, 6, 5, 6, 6, 3. How can we have such a difference? We've got a lot of 3s here. We've got a lot of 5s. We've got a lot of 6s. It's interesting, isn't it? How we could have so many here. So thanks for chucking those numbers in. That's all good. Let's come back to our image here. This is a picture of a cow. I saw our fellas in Brisbane. I wonder if they're people I've shown this image to before, but that's okay. So if you look at the image where I've got you can see here you've got one eye, and then sort of roughly through the middle of the picture, you've got two eyes staring at you, and to the side of each eye, you've got a little black area. That's your ears. The very bottom of the screen in the middle, you've got a black area. That's the nose of the cow. And then sort of 80% of the way up the screen, you can just see the outline of the head of the cow. There's a bit of a fence behind the cow. So happy to share this image with you. I think it's a great image. I've always used it because it helps us to actually understand how prior knowledge is so important. If you don't have that image, if you don't have that particular image of a cow to recall from your brain, you're not going to see the cow. If you've got it, which I suspect the other people had, no problems at all. You just pull it straight back out because it's already there. What about our sentence? We split pretty evenly. I'd say 50% of you had 3 F's and 50% of you roughly either had the 5 or the 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How does that happen? How do we find ourselves looking at the sentence but only seeing 3? 3 is the most common. So typically 70% of people will write down 3. Because I asked you to read it, right? I didn't ask you to get a pen out and cross out the F's. I asked you to read it. And the challenge here, of course, is that when you read it, your brain is hearing what you read. And it hears of, right? Of sounds like OV, not OF. So as you read through that, your brain is picking up on foot for Fred, foot for Flintstone, foot for frolicking. But when you get to the ofs, your brain keeps moving through, right? As Daniel says, we skim through that because we can, right? We already recognize what those letters are. We know what they mean. We move through them. But our brain isn't plugged into this to be so analytical. It just wants to help us get through that process. I'll give you another chance. This time, I'm going to flash something up on the screen, and I want you to write in what shape do you see. Just write in what shape. I'll put it on the screen, and then I'll take it off the screen. All right? So on the screen, off the screen. So just type in the shape that you saw. Very good. I got a few interesting ones there. Maria. She might have been with me before, Maria. No, I don't think so. But anyway, triangles and circles. So we've gone from a lot of triangles to start with to triangles and circles. So, of course, there is no triangle here. A triangle has 3 sides, and there's no triangle here. We've got some Pac-Man shapes. We don't even have a circle, if we're honest, because the circle goes all the way around, right? We've got these shapes which could only be described as Pac-Man, but we find ourselves making an incorrect judgment. Our brains do that very easily, right? We're happy to settle for what we first think we see, right? If I take those Pac-Man shapes away, then there's no triangle there, right? But they create the illusion of something, right? So the big question is, how will AI help our students understand? So not just get access to information, but we want them to learn, right? We want good, appropriate changes to be occurring in their brain architecture. Well, here's a big challenge for us all. You go back to Bloom's original work in 1984, at the very end of his career. So Benjamin Bloom, who's Bloom's taxonomy and our use of verbs, comes from a lot of his work. And towards the end of his career, he identified what he called the 2 sigma problem. And that was that if we looked at most classrooms, in this case, the conventional classroom, we would expect to see this sort of normal distribution where we'll find, if it's just a random group of students, that we would find some students over on the right-hand side do really, really well. They get the higher grade, but overall, the majority of students are going to end up with a sort of passing grade. And we've got this other minority of students who are going to get this failing grade. But in his study of the students, what he found was that if we change the style of teaching and learning, so we use mastery learning, so it wasn't like, here's your exam, oh no, you failed, but here's your prep for the exam, and no, you haven't quite got it, and here's what you need to learn. So we were able to coach people through a process of mastering something, that we could significantly shift that curve. We could end up with more people doing better and less people actually failing if we were to offer the mastery. Now, of course, a lot of education institutions don't particularly like that because it's quite time consuming to actually slow the process down and make sure we're not leaving anyone behind. Alternatively, if we actually had one-to-one mentorship, we can have an entirely different curve here at all. We can actually have a huge amount of students doing really, really well, and no one failing. If everyone had a one-on-one mentorship all the way as they're going through life, learning could be, their individual difficulties and challenges could be addressed at that individual level. So what could AI do? Well, AI, I can bring up my little thing here. AI could actually create this personal tutor. It could actually take us to the promised land that Bloom was actually talking about. And I know Daniel's with us today, and I know Daniel's doing a lot of work in this space, a lot of great work. You can also give us this opportunity to essentially have a personal teaching assistant that helps us with the work that we're doing, right? That gives us the resources and the time to be able to support people with this mastery learning. So there's clearly a great opportunity for AI to help us shift the type of distributions of student outcomes that we might expect. So the next question, I think, for us to think through is, how will AI complement current student learning approaches? To think that through, we've got to sort of step back and not think about what just happens in our classrooms, because again, that's, very little of our learning happens in a classroom. Maybe it's 10%. Maybe it's, as we get older, it's less than 5%. Our learning happens 24/7, and it happens 7 days a week. And it happens before we go to school, and it happens well and truly after we go to school. And we can think about this by reference to this notion of the extended mind. So this is sort of tapping into the work of Annie Paul and a lot of other really, really good neuroscientists who recognise and have recognised now for quite some time that our brains are much more than a memory. Our extended minds recognise that we have learning that's situated, where we're actually tapping into external resources and knowledge. We have embodied cognition, which we do when we move around, when we use gestures, when we tap into signals. And we have distributed cognition, when we work with people. And all of these complement and support our memorised cognition, the use of our working memory. So if we were to think about the process of AI in relation to these 4 types of cognitive loops, you can see that there is a potential problem with the embodied cognition, because we might just be encouraging people to sit behind a computer. And we don't want stillness, and we don't want engagement only with text. Those 2 things are likely to lead to memorization problems, okay? So there's a potential negative with the way we could see people engaging with such materials. We need to make sure that people move to learn and engage with gestures and symbols to help them encode that information. And you can see the little comment on the right-hand side. This cognitive loop from the body, its movements and feelings to working memory, it's really, really important. When I go on my walks of a day, if I change the direction of the walk and I use the same music, all of a sudden I'm expecting certain music as I'm going up a hill. My brain has encoded certain music is going to occur at a certain time. But if I'm doing it in the reverse, it's all out of sync and I notice it. If we think about situated cognition, this is definitely a great space for AI. In this particular case, we're looking at the cognitive offloading that we can do. We do this when we pick up a pen and paper and we try to work through something, when we use a calculator, when we want to know how to get from A to B and we use the directions on our phone. This is about accessing what we call the detachment gain, which is by detaching ourselves from what's happening in our brain to other sources of information and direction, we can gain from this process of detachment. So we want to externalize our thinking. When we do that, we unlock information in our brains by bringing other reminders in. So projecting thoughts and manipulating objects helps us to think more effectively. All right, it gets rid of that brain fog or confusion that might be around, or the fact we've just simply forgotten something, right? In terms of distributed, this is a really, really important part for us. We might have our students working with AI, but we don't want them to do it alone. How can we create a community where they're actually engaged with this? So it's not a secret process where I don't want to be caught using AI. How can we bring AI in and make it an acceptable way where the class is expected to engage with this process, right? It's not the secret, the dirty secret that we want to hide. It's actually a big part of the student's development. Now, we can do this in cognitive apprenticeships, where we're actually scaffolding processes where we are the experts as educators, and we are slowly retracting our influence and enabling the student to take over. We can do this by allowing collective working memory. So for someone like myself who has pretty severe ADHD, I have almost no working memory. Anything you tell me 3 or 4 minutes ago, chances are it's gone if something else has taken my interest. But if I was working with a group of people, all of a sudden we've got more potential to be able to hold on to those ideas or understand the application of those ideas. And very importantly, as I'll get to in a minute, they create opportunities for generative learning. Maybe I'm going to sell you my thinking. I'm going to teach you. Maybe I'm going to share with you my understanding. But we can create opportunities for generative learning. So we think, learn, and remember better through conversations with others than we do simply by thinking by ourselves. And lastly, of course, one of the big challenges we have is information overload and the problems that we have with the limited amount of processing power our brains have with our working memory. Some people are lucky to have really good ability to juggle 7 things at one time. I'm certainly not one of those people. And so issues around cognitive load, the need for active learning and continuous feedback, and maybe the most important thing that we don't talk about in a learning context, and that is the forgetting curve. Who cares if someone learns something today if they've already forgotten it in 2 weeks' time? How do we address the forgetting curve? And so by allowing students to simply download or generate information that they can serve up in their assignments to us and get a tick, but no learning has actually happened, nothing's actually happened in the cognitive architecture, we're just inviting that learning curve to be deeper. So the circuitry of information from working memory to long-term memory and back, we need to be mindful of how we're actually strengthening that, not weakening that. We're always facing this problem. This is an inescapable problem. If you look at I know there's a bit happening in this diagram here, but look on the left-hand side, we've got the novice. So we assume we're just labeling someone who doesn't know something as a novice. And we're saying we would like to get them through education across to this process of them becoming competent, knowledgeable about something, or able to do something. So to the extent that they already have prior knowledge and prior experience about what we're about to do, they're more likely to remain in this educated space. They're more likely to also get to this point where we have meaningful learning. Meaningful learning means that what we've learned, we can continue to apply into the future and in different novel types of contexts. Alternatively, if the novice starts off with no prior knowledge or no experience, then they quickly default into this uneducated space. If they're using AI in this context, they may get enough of what they need to know to pass their assignment, but if it's only surface learning, then eventually they're just going to end up defaulting back to having some prior knowledge, some experience, but they won't end up being competent in that particular area. Now, one of the challenges that we have here is we tend to think about being educated as something which we can demonstrate by what's hanging on our wall. Education being something we attain. This is a really, really poor way to think about education. The best way to think about education, which has been around for a long, long time, is that on any given day, you are educated and you are uneducated. It just depends what you're doing. It depends what you're trying to do. I'm sure if you all sat down and had a little notebook and you asked yourself every day, do I always know how to do something? Do I always know what I need to know? I think any honest person would say, there are lots of times when I don't know what I need to do. I just changed jobs. Everything's different in this organisation. I don't know how to find something. We're making some changes in the organisation. I don't know what the new process is. So we tend to move between being educated and uneducated on a daily basis. And we cycle through this process, oscillate through it hundreds of times, right? Depending on what we're trying to do. It doesn't matter what degrees you've got hanging on the wall. It doesn't make you any less likely to not be moving through this process of being educated at one moment and then uneducated in the next. Now, I think AI clearly has a great role here to help boost people out of a space where they feel uncomfortable and not knowledgeable. But whether or not the knowledge that they've gained from AI actually truly helps them to become educated or just to satisfy a requirement of a task, that's two different things altogether. And I'll tell you why this is so important. If we think about the pros and cons of AI, let's start with students, the very first one at the top. Our students using AI is absolutely critically important. Why? Because all of the jobs they're going to do in the future are going to require them to use AI. Whether they've done a degree in project management, in tourism, in accounting, that's almost incidental that they've got their certificate, that they've got their qualification in that area. If our students attain a certificate in a specific area and they go into the workplace and the workplace is increasingly using AI, and we haven't actually enabled them to develop those digital skills during their programs, we're really selling them short. It'll be hard for them as they move forward. So one of the big reasons why students need to use AI is because it's helping them to prepare them to become someone who is capable of being able to navigate a world that's increasingly using AI. Think about this as an example. Every day and right now, you're using the generative model that you've built up over time. Now, this is an English version, but of course we can think about this in any language. We have an understanding of what letters are. We understand how letters become words. We understand how words become sentences, and we understand how to connect sentences so that they make paragraphs, and we can put these into bigger forms, into books and articles and whatever we might want to do. So we've created a generative model which automatically operates in everything we do in our life through language. We're not confused, or not too confused. And when we pick up a book, it helps us to understand what people were saying 200 years ago. And if we're writing something today, maybe people in 200 years will still understand. This process of generative operation is at the very heart of what it actually means to be human. And the biggest challenge that we have is that this is going to be the next generative model of learning that people on this planet will be using. The ability to be a creator and a consumer of AI. And so it's very, very important that we think through how we're going to make sure our students know how to do it. That's so important. So, pros and cons. Let's get ourselves to the finish line. In addition to development of critical digital skills, the immediacy, the accessibility and feedback, a student by themselves, unable to sort of move forward, not able to reach their educator, being able to tap into something during their time is so important. The ability to individualize their learning. It might be the development of study materials. It might be through proof checking, if that's something that's appropriate for the nature of the assessment. It could be through opportunities to strengthen the arguments that they've already made. Again, if that's appropriate for the nature of the assessment that's in. So these are all huge, especially that top one. These are all huge reasons why AI is important for our students. The problems we have is if it's misused, it can severely weaken the actual memory of students with the materials that they're working with. If students don't understand the material sufficiently, they're unlikely to also be able to perceive the bias and misleading information that may be present from AI-generated content. And of course, used the wrong way has the potential to be viewed as cheating. For us as educators, well, I think there's great opportunities here for the efficient development of lesson materials. There's an opportunity for us to be able to deepen engagement. And you can see from that Khan Mingo example there of just how much somebody could really get into the flow of being able to have that personal assistant. I think a big one, stepping back one step from the educator to the institution, is the opportunity for programmatic consistency. If we start using AI to develop rubrics and other processes, we can ensure that we've got a nice, consistent process happening, which is so important for the student learning experience. There is one little challenge here. I haven't called it a pro or a con, but there is a need to think about how we're going to shift from assessing outcomes to assessing processes. So it could be all the little processes, the units of competence that collectively add up to the outcome, but the outcome itself isn't the big deal. It's the fact that they complete all the processes on the way through, because I think that's a big shift that's happening in higher education right now. The negative is, if everything's online and easy to find, then there could be a need to revise materials. There could be a student disconnect. If we're suggesting students can just head off and do their own thing and they don't actually need us as much, that could be a problem. And of course, job security concerns. If you play this forward a few steps, do we even have education institutions? Is it just a big computer in the sky that everyone goes to? That's taking things a fair way forward, but how these technologies will be used, I don't think we're able to fully comprehend all of these issues just yet. So I hope that's helped to sort of give you a broader, perhaps, way of thinking through this. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm going to invite you all to drop some questions, or maybe even just post some comments that you might have so that we can actually think about what that presentation has or hasn't sparked in your own thinking. So feel free to drop something in there. What we got? Yeah, it's an interesting, Krishna, it's an interesting comment, what to do when we're so left behind. A part of me wants to sort of just see what other people are doing. I think we can be very pragmatic. I mean, if Daniel was to give us a follow-up webinar on what he does and how he uses technology, then you could come to the conclusion that we're not necessarily all behind, right? Because there are a lot of people who are making starts and doing things in various different ways. But as an institution, the investment in time and money and changes to actually say, okay, let's now all do things this way, it's a bit tricky, because ultimately we're actually in the business of competencies as well, right? So unless our competences are directly related to using AI and other such things, some of the times we actually want people standing in front of us and showing us what they can do. Melissa, we're certainly using AI internally, but only at that sort of, Microsoft Copilot type thing for, we've got some work to do in area X, in area A. Can we scope the field and sort of, collapse a day's work into a few minutes by trying to understand what does Copilot think? I'm a little bit reticent in that, because I tried to use Copilot and ChatGPT to help me in a book I was writing recently, and I was way behind schedule. And I thought, well, maybe I could sort of get 1,000 words for each of these chapters as an introduction, and then I can go through and reword things. And I thought that might save me some time. And it really looked like it did save me a lot of time until I started reading through what I downloaded, and it was absolute garbage. It was absolutely, totally wrong. All of it. None of it was right. So I just had to just do it all myself. So I do worry about the information that's being generated in that generative sense. I think we do have to be really careful about, if we don't know something really well and a student is giving us work and we think it looks okay, I think it's like using, I mentioned this to Daniel the other day, when we ask AI to create H5P resources for us, that's fantastic that we can actually create such a quick process, right? Wonderful. But we do need to know whether or not what it's created is good. right? I think it's great that it can do something quickly, but we need to make sure what it's actually done is good. Just look for a couple more of the comments here. Daniel says, big conversation as you've put forward. How do we manage this within old frameworks that are in place that govern education system? I think I've started to touch on that, Daniel. I think, to be honest with you, I think it's about creating a distributed system where we actually work out how can we work with educators such as you, but how can we work with educators who can actually show us the shortcuts they've already worked through. We shouldn't all be going back to try and learn from the very beginning. We need to find a way of not only, the terminology I would think for it is distributed leadership. How do we actually find the people in the organisation who want to pitch to us and say, hey, I think I can help us to achieve this and these outcomes? How will we do it, right? And I think in your case, Dan, you're in a good situation to be able to sort of say, hey, I'd like to sort of put a bargain in front of you, because I think here's a whole bunch of learning that we can disseminate, but what's in it for me, right? Because it shouldn't be, employees who just gift organisations knowledge and understanding around these things. And I know David is very much tuned into that type of mindset. We would love to think about how we can actually share the creation and understanding of these things. So think about what you might like to pitch in that sense, guys. Brian has asked or said, if AI can't figure out what accounts are bots on social media, then it seems it has a really long way to go. Yep. I think these things are all going to get sorted, but at the moment, I mean, can you imagine we got an American presidential election coming up, which sort of looks like it's going to be pretty messy, whichever way you lean, vote, whatever, those sorts of things. Can you imagine how much content is going to be created that's AI generated, that looks real, that's not real? I think this election campaign, because of the stakes that are involved and the misinformation that's always in those spaces, it's going to be really, really tough, right? And does that make people misbelieve about the value of AI, that it's actually this sort of, I'd say keep your eye on the people like Khan Academy, Sal Khan, and what they're doing, because I think they're doing it in all the right ways, right? I love the way he said, we don't give you the answer. We're going to help you walk through to find the answer for yourself. Now, if that's the direction things are going in, it's pretty exciting, right? Yeah, and I agree, Brian. That's why the distributed cognitive loops are so important for us to factor into this. We can't have people becoming more isolated. We have to try and find ways of actually creating those social loops where people can actually talk about, well, this is how I'm doing it. We got to find a way. I walked out of the previous university I worked at. I walked towards my car a year ago, and there were 4 boys behind me, about a few meters behind me, and they were talking about AI and how they use it in their assignments. And I thought, well, I'll just walk a bit slower here so I can stay inside earshot of their conversation. And it was obvious to me that they knew 10 times more about AI than we as educators knew, right? And we need to reverse that. We need to not make it a secret conversation that they're having. We need to bring that conversation out and celebrate the ingenuity and creativity that people have with their creativity. That means we have to redesign our assessments, right? We need to think about how do we actually get someone to demonstrate their competence in a way that taps in and uses these, right? So I think there's a little summit that we as an organisation and contributors need to have to think about how we're going to do that. Yeah, I agree, Melissa. There's and the challenge for us is, and the auto marking is getting even scarier. We've got universities in Sweden now that I know of that are actually using AI to generate their curriculum to communicate with their students. The students are using AI to do their assessments, and then they have AI marking the assessments. So I'm not sure who was doing the learning throughout that entire process, but we've got to find a way of avoiding that. And then I think the only way we can do it is to be really open and mature about it, and set up clear boundaries. This is cheating. That's not your words. This is the preparatory work we would love to see you going off and doing and building up those skills. And this is where you're actually going to tell us what it actually means, or what you can actually do as a result of being able to do these things. So, yeah. But look, I think we've just about reached our time. I think you all know how to find me. If you don't, ask somebody who does. More than happy to take your questions, post this. We'll circulate the actual video. I think in week 6, we've got another webinar, which I'll be presenting, which is more my home turf, because this is a bit foreign to me in some ways, which is why I might sort of pull it back more from the technical to the actual learning side of things. But that's on being more entrepreneurial as a learner, and I'll throw in obviously the educational side of it as well. And that's my wheelhouse. That's the stuff that I'm obviously very comfortable with. So you'll get hopefully by next week, we'll have some ads out for that. So you'll have a little bit more time to get yourself organised. And that one's a bit longer, and we'll make it a bit more interactive. And it's later in the day. I think it's a 4 to 6 type session. So for those of you who are on campus, go and enjoy some networking. And I'm looking forward to catching up with a few people here on level 12. So thank you very much for your time. And I look forward to talking to you all very soon. Cheers, guys.